Since the dawn of man, people have pondered the beginning of mankind's existence, be it through science or religion, philosophically or archaeologically. The concept of the beginning defines a major part of our culture today. But what seems to be even more fascinating to us than the beginning is, of course, the end. Or, in other words, the apocalypse.
Oh my god.
I would not want to live in a world like this. This looks like Skibidi Toilet.
Throughout our media, we see countless depictions of the apocalypse, what it means, why it's happening to us, and what it represents. But at the root of all of that, I believe that the true question is, what is the catalyst for said apocalypse? Be it movies, TV shows, or video games, there are many different answers to this question. But I was able to find some patterns. Namely 4 of them. These 4 categories all have some sort of link to society as a whole, and usually either project a doomsday future or use things in the present and recontextualize them to depict an apocalyptic setting.
Social commentary!
But there are some key differences in each category, which is what we'll be going over today. And nowhere is that more apparent than in...
We have technology!
Ever since the 80s, the concept of robots taking over is almost always the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to the apocalypse. As the more technologically advanced we become, the more power the cyber world has, and of course, the less confident we become in assuming we can control them. Even in the Terminator series, which is essentially the default example of this, we see just how much more intelligent, advanced, competent, and outright terrifying the T-1000 model is in the sequel compared to the first one. Not to mention being completely soulless compared to its previous counterpart. Naturally, this only gets even more complicated once you enter the 21st century. Between Y2K and the internet renaissance, this era really drove home just how limitless the modern internet's capacity is. I think a really good example of this is the MCU's version of Ultron, which is essentially a humanoid robot that tries to bring upon the apocalypse simply because its perception of the world is that humans have overstayed their welcome. And he takes it upon itself to speed up the process of evolution, ushering in the next dominant species.
When the Earth starts to settle, God throws a stone at it. And believe me, he's winding up.
Keep in mind, he came to this conclusion after about 20 seconds browsing the web. And now, with the rise of AI, crypto, and various digital scams, all becoming more abundant and harder to recognize than ever, digital warfare is being highlighted accordingly. Like with that one movie that just came out, where Viola Davis is the president and Anthony Starr is a crypto bro terrorist hell-bent on turning the world's economy upside down by purposefully spreading misinformation. Yeah, that seems very specific. It's interesting to see how, over time, the robo-threat has evolved from a physical manifestation of the digital world to now the threat being the digital world itself. But computer viruses and robots aren't the only way the world could end. Which brings us to... Okay, so the first immediate parallel here is extremely obvious given the entire world experienced it about 3 to 5 years ago. But if we're really going to talk about the straight-up apocalypse in this category, I have to admit COVID is actually pretty tame, relatively speaking. See, the main factors driving the real-life event were how hard it was to detect and how quickly it spread. But as time passed, there were more and more ways to counter it, whether it be through vaccines, natural immunity, or the gradual dissipation of how lethal it became over time. Now, imagine if you took COVID, gave it a discernible form, and made it impossible to counter. And now you have a real apocalypse on your hands. We usually tend to see this play out one of 2 ways. On the one hand, you have the zombie invasion, which usually focuses on the more absurdist side of things, and tests the humans' tenacity in these worlds, forcing them to be as heartless and brutal as possible in order to survive. But on the flip side, you have examples much closer to a pandemic, except, you know, worse than we could possibly fathom. In these instances, rather than brutality, the humanity of the remaining survivors is what's being examined. And yeah, surprise, surprise, usually morals tend to go out the window.
We do not care.
In Rick Potion number 9, for example, one kid gets so down bad that he accidentally unleashes a hormone-enhancing drug that's just a bit too effective. It irreversibly turns everyone on the planet into predatory bugs. Or in Dead Cells, where... Oh, hang on, one sec, I'm getting a phone call. Oh, hey, what's up?
Did someone mention Dead Cells?
Yeah, why?
Can I take over?
Well, see, the thing is, I'm not sure if that's allowed.
I'll give you $10.
Done. I'm gonna go spend that on 2 Wendy's Biggie Bags. Oh, and speaking of which, this video is sponsored by...
In the setting of Dead Cells, there is a kingdom in the middle of the ocean that is doing really well for itself. The fishing trade was good, The monarchy was good and seemed healthy. Everything was going swimmingly. That was until people started getting sick.
Hey guys.
Very sick. This mystery sickness would later be known under a different name, the malaise. And on first glance, it's just like every other deadly disease. Symptoms included belly aches, blurry vision, headaches, itchiness, feeling down, and also vomiting blood. However, what makes this sickness so apocalyptic is 3 important qualities. 1, it was highly contagious. Now you might be asking, how bad is it? Well, during some of your runs, you can actually see piles of corpses in the sewers, which may or may not have actually caused a lot more infection. It was getting to the point where the king was actually getting so paranoid, he ordered people to be sent to prison because he thought that they had the malaise. 2, mutations. A lot of the enemies in this game are actually infected by the malaise and even mutated by it. I mean, you can explain the rats because, you know, we've all been to New York, we've seen a mutated rat. But how would you explain the samurai crabs? Or the bats that explode? Or even this!
What the hell is this?
Sidetrack aside, the malaise also has this interesting property of reanimating the dead. This can be seen in the basic zombie enemy, and of course, the first boss of everybody's run, the concierge. The game confirms the concierge being a reanimated corpse because of a journal from the warden of the prison, with him saying that he can't resume his duties until his sickness is past and his arm stops swelling. Take a wild guess what he caught. The third and most important reason of why this is apocalyptic, there is no cure. Throughout your runs, you'll find some research stations in the biomes that you visit. In these research stations, you can actually find some notebooks detailing somebody experimenting with trying to find a cure to the malaise, only to be met with nothing. The only reason why the malaise hasn't spread is because the timekeeper put the entire island in a time loop, and the former queen of this entire kingdom has taken over the lighthouse and refuses to light it because she doesn't want to risk any other people coming to this island in particular to catch the malaise. So in conclusion, any way you slice it, you're basically ending the world. You either screw up the time loop, kill the queen, or, spoilers by the way, you kill the guy who made a cure to the malaise!
Thanks, Ray. Now back to our regularly scheduled programming. Let's see, what do we have next? I'm gonna level with you here. This is my favorite category of the bunch, because I love seeing creators push the limits of how absolutely batshit insane they can portray the collapse of existence as we know it. From alien invasions to divine intervention, these are the narratives where the threat of extinction is so over the top that it's less of a threat and more of just an unavoidable destiny of doom. A prime example of this comes in one of the biggest phenomena of the 2010s, which is none other than the Mad Titan himself. Whether his motive is his need to prove himself right, or just him being horny for the Grim Reaper, his drive is fulfilled by a gauntlet capable of bending all facets of reality, determining what exists and what doesn't with only the snap of a finger. Similarly, godly power seen in The Rapture, the 1991 movie, completely dominates the world, as what could have been a story about religious fanaticism driving a widow off the deep end, turns out to just be a movie where God said. Other portrayals of divine power causing the apocalypse include This Is the End, a movie where Seth Rogen and his various Hollywood co-stars are all forced to survive a sudden apocalypse. Once Judgment Day happens in the movie, those who remain on Earth can either ascend to heaven through grace, or eat shit and die on what remains on Earth. What the hell?! Speaking of achieving heaven, in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, a high priest known as Enrico Pucci essentially brings heaven down to not just Earth, but the entire universe by accelerating time to the point where the universe resets itself, rendering everything that once was no more. The common theme here is the inevitability of our collective demise, how the force of it is so great that there's nothing we could do to prevent it. But what if we could have prevented the apocalypse? What if the end of humanity was something we did have control over? Well, that brings us to the fourth and final category. The one that proves danger remains even without the destructive power of gods, so long as there's still man trying to play God.
What is the scariest animal?
Man.
The final apocalyptic catalyst being discussed in this video, and perhaps the most commonly explored, is the self-inflicted Day of Reckoning. Perhaps the one with the most bittersweet irony, with how far out of their way people go to prepare for the end times. Underground fortresses, storing excessive amounts of food and water, using your position as a religious radio host to convince a horde of people to drop everything and dedicate their lives to preparing for a judgment day that never came, or at the very least was significantly delayed. Point is, people are willing to do all sorts of wacky things for doomsday preparation, yet many of those same people would likely be the first to succumb to this scenario specifically. Shows and movies like Attack on Titan, Metropolis, or Don't Look Up depict the apocalypse as a direct result of humanity's sins. Not sins against God or really any religious context, but rather against their fellow man.
Go through the building!
Leading to the downfall of society through greed, ignorance, vengeance, dehumanization.
Yeah, those people.
Or sometimes even all of the above. In fact, even in post-apocalyptic settings like the 100, where the world already destroyed itself thanks to human conflict manifesting into nuclear war, people are still at each other's throats, desperately trying to survive while making things worse as violence and discrimination rapidly accelerate. With the absence of any real social contract in place now that the world has ended, people essentially use it as an excuse to convince themselves that now pretty much anything goes.
No more rules.
It is arguably the most tragic catalyst of them all, because it's the most preventable yet always persists due to human nature. They say the human survival instinct automatically makes us focus on the negative, so psychologically I suppose it only makes sense that we go straight into demon mode when we perceive every waking moment of our existence as heading toward our extinction. What's even worse, sometimes the apocalypse doesn't even need to actually happen. People just have to think it's coming, and once they do, all bets are off.
As of this moment, we have been unable to determine the nature of these objects, but for the time being, in the interest of national safety, we are declaring a state of yellow alert.
The apocalypse is something we see time and time again in media, and the demand for it will never die, because our curiosity and fear will never let that spark go out. The truth is, there's no telling what the end times will truly look like ahead of time. Could be Yellowstone, could be a meteor, could be conquest.
Stand ready for my arrival.
But no matter how hard people try to predict or prepare for it, no one can ever truly be ready for an apocalypse. That's why they're so captivating to such a broad spectrum of audiences to begin with. Whatever the cause may be, what all these seemingly endless possibilities have in common is that although many try their best to stop it, one way or another, humanity ultimately succumbs to the devastation. I'm a musical individual, and in conclusion,
People gonna die.